17 on ABC and ABC iView.
Donald Trump to be sentenced in July after being found guilty of falsifying business records.
The real verdict is going to be November 5th by the people.
Bruce Lemon to appeal the ruling in his defamation case against Lisa Wilkinson and Network 10. Code Yellow called for all public hospitals in South Australia. And Alex de Minaur cruises into the third round of the French Open. Hello, welcome to ABC News. I'm Lorna Dunkley. Former US President Donald Trump will be sentenced in July after being found guilty of 34 counts of falsifying business records in New York. A jury found Mr. Trump paid hush money to adult film star Stormy Daniels and falsified business records to conceal the payment during his 2016 election campaign. The 77-year-old becomes the first US president in history to be convicted of a crime. We begin our coverage with North America correspondent Carrington Clark in New York.
This jury of 12 New Yorkers decided that they had been persuaded by the case put forward by the prosecutor beyond all reasonable doubt, that Donald Trump, the former president of the United States, had falsified business records in relation to a hush money payment to a former adult film star, Stormy Daniels, and that he did so in order to receive an advantage at the 2016 presidential election, which he then subsequently won. They've accepted the prosecution's case that Donald Trump had had an extramarital affair with Stormy Daniels back in 2006. Then in 2016, in the midst of that ferocious campaign between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, that Donald Trump was so scared of the details of that affair getting out into the press that he authorized a payment to her of $130,000 US, and that he then falsified business records effectively to cover it up. Now, this jury sat listening to evidence for 6 weeks, or almost 6 weeks, through, at times, very technical detail. But it seems clear that they were convinced most assuredly by the testimony of Michael Cohen. And he is the former fixer, the man who used to be tasked with dealing with many of the dirty laundry issues that Donald Trump had been confronted with, and has now turned into one of his great foes. He was the star witness, despite being a self-admitted liar and a self-admitted thief, and a man who himself has gone to jail, and yet the jury believed his story. Now, understandably, Donald Trump was unhappy when he heard the guilty verdicts read out in succession in court. He didn't show much reaction. As the first guilty verdict was read out, he closed his eyes, he seemed to say no, but then outside the court, he was much more open about how angry he was with this decision.
This was a rigged, disgraceful trial. The real verdict is going to be November 5th by the people. And they know what happened here, and everybody knows what happened here. You have a Soros-backed DA, and the whole thing. We didn't do a thing wrong. I'm a very innocent man, and it's okay. I'm fighting for our country. I'm fighting for our Constitution. Our whole country is being rigged right now. This was done by the Biden administration in order to wound or hurt an opponent, a political opponent. And I think it's just a disgrace. And we'll keep fighting. We'll fight till the end, and we'll win, because our country's gone to hell. We don't have the same country anymore. We have a divided mess. We're a nation in decline, serious decline. Millions and millions of people pouring into our country right now, from prisons and from mental institutions, terrorists, and they're taking over our country. We have a country that's in big trouble, but this was a rigged decision right from day one, with a conflicted judge who should have never been allowed to try this case, never.
The 12 everyday jurors vowed to make a decision based on the evidence and the law, and the evidence and the law alone. Their deliberations led them to a unanimous conclusion beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant, Donald J. Trump, is guilty of 34 counts of falsifying business records in the first degree to conceal a scheme to corrupt the 2016 election. And while this defendant may be unlike any other in American history, we arrived at this trial and ultimately today at this verdict in the same manner as every other case that comes through the courtroom doors, by following the facts and the law and doing so without fear or favor.
Now, Donald Trump is experiencing his first night as a convicted felon. The jury wasn't determining how long the potential sentence was for Donald Trump. It's up to 4 years potentially. Most analysts believe that is very unlikely that he would be incarcerated, but he will now have to go through this process, as all felons do here in New York, of actually meeting with the probation board in order to put his case about why he shouldn't face jail time. But given his lack of remorse and the fact that we saw him come out straight away and dismiss the verdict by the jury, would you think not work in his favour? What he has tried to do is try to capitalise on this politically. His campaign very quickly out with a request for more funds from his supporters. Whereas on the opposite side of the aisle, we heard from the Joe Biden campaign a quick statement imploring people to effectively go out and vote, saying that the only way to keep Donald Trump away from the Oval Office is at the ballot box.
Well, to help make sense of what it all means, I'm joined by the hosts of Planet America, John Barron and Chaz Licciardello. Welcome to you both. I know it's been a very busy day for you. While we didn't know what the verdict would be, actually, the narrative afterwards, Chaz, is quite predictable, isn't it?
Yes, there's certainly the writer saying, oh, well, now we've won the election, we're going to come back stronger than ever now, and this is all rigged, and this is an outrage, and the left are saying justice has prevailed, and they're ringing the bells, and they're all very excited. This is very much as predicted, but where it goes from here might not be quite so predictable, because there's a big question mark over what kind of sentencing we're going to see, and there's such a large range of potential options. Anything could happen.
What about the Republican Party, the RNC Congress, where they make him their candidate is just a few days after sentencing? How firmly will the party stick behind a convicted criminal?
Right now, there is no reason for them to think that Donald Trump is in no worse position today than he was yesterday. Yesterday, he was in front in the polls over Joe Biden in the crucial swing states that will decide the election in November and in the average of national polls. He also is legally bound to be their nominee. They can change their party rules if they wanted to, but it would be a bad look. And they've tried to stand up to Trump in the past and it didn't work out. They tried to challenge him this time with other candidates and it didn't work out. The problem the Republican Party has is Republican voters want Donald Trump. They still want Donald Trump. So, yeah, we're going to have this extraordinary situation where a convicted criminal is going to be nominated by the Republican Party as their presidential candidate for this year. And before we even get to that nomination, Lorna, he will be standing on a debate stage in late June alongside Joe Biden. Current president, former president, also a criminal. Are we going to make him president again?
Let's jump off that and just make the point that, like John said, we have been here before. Even though convicted criminal is new, the Access Hollywood tape back in 2016, we'd never seen anything like that. That, in terms of the leap up, that was a bigger leap up than we just saw today. And what happened then was Republicans went crazy for about 2 weeks, not knowing what to do, and they panicked, running around like headless chooks, and they were back on board. And I expect the same thing to happen now.
That's the party. What about the voters, though? Those the middle ground Republican supporters, will they stay away?
I think if you are still buying the Trump package in May 2024, you're on for the ride. Okay. I think they'll stay.
We don't know what we don't know. About 25% of American voters say a criminal conviction would make them less likely to vote for Donald Trump. 50% say will make no difference at all. 23%, Lorna, say a criminal conviction would make me more likely to vote for Donald Trump. That's a pretty weird thought process. But look, if you stuck with Donald Trump through his presidency, through the tweets, through the affairs with porn stars, through the reckless handling of foreign policy, as a middle-of-the-road suburban conservative moderate, are you now going to say, well, he's been caught fiddling his accounts to cover up an affair that we kind of already knew about in any event? Is that really going to be the deal breaker? Maybe it is for some. Maybe it is for some, but it's possibly a little bit of a stretch.
Chaz, I know you like your T-shirts and I know you like your statistics. So straight after the verdict, Donald Trump's campaign donation page crashed. There are T-shirts already out there with his face and guilty on them. How much does Donald Trump stand to make in surplus because he's been found guilty? Well,
look, who knows how long this bump goes for, but in the past, these kinds of bumps, usually you're talking $5 to $10 million a day. Let's say there's a bump for at least the next 2 or 3 weeks. That's a handy lead over Biden in money as a result of this.
Right, which he hasn't been up to this point.
No, the one area, even though Trump's been ahead of the polls, the one area Biden has dominated him has been in money. But Trump did come back a little bit last month, but this could put him over the top as far as money goes.
But Joe Biden himself is not above trying to raise money off this result. He has retained a discreet silence for the last 7 weeks on this case. The Biden campaign and now the president, at least the emails asking for money that are being sent out to supporters today in the president's name and voice, are saying what today's verdict proves is the only way to stop a convicted criminal becoming president of the United States is to vote for Joe Biden in November. And the only way that Joe Biden wins is by you donating money. So the money bumps on both sides is going to be an interesting sort of straw poll in the next couple of days to see where the enthusiasm is.
Of course, all of this was happening in the run-up to the 2006 presidential election when there was various slogans going on in Donald Trump's campaign. Hillary Clinton has been speaking this evening. She didn't address it directly, but she came on stage and said, "Anything going on today?" And the crowd cheered. Gosh, how different history would have been if those hush money payments hadn't been made.
It was such a close election in 2016, Lorna, as it was in 2020. We will never know what could have made a difference. In this case, in a legal sense, they didn't determine whether, if we'd found out about Stormy Daniels and the other scandals that were being buried by David Pecker and the National Enquirer, would they have made a difference in that election? 42,000 votes in 3 crucial states decided that election. Would some people have said, well, the Access Hollywood where Donald Trump basically admitted on tape to sexual assault, if that was not too much for them, was, oh yes, and he also had a consensual relationship a decade ago with a porn star. It may or may not have made a difference. You can understand why Hillary Clinton feels as though there are probably 10 things that made a difference, and she just got very, very unlucky, which in a sense she did.
She was targeted, though. Lock her up.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that Hillary would probably have a stronger case to make if she hadn't spent the last 8 years saying that she got robbed by Russia. Yeah. I think just a switch to go, oh no, actually I got robbed by this other thing, I think feels a little bit less convincing, but she'll try.
She will.
One final thought from you both. There's already been on the social media platforms that the loyal Trump supporters converse on, saying we should march places, we should take down the judge, we should hunt out the jurors. How concerned will authorities be in America of that? Look, the authorities are going to be very concerned. It's their job to be concerned. I'm sceptical that kind of thing will happen simply because I think Trump fans will be worried that will impact his sentencing if the whole place goes up in flames. Like I think that Trump is going to not want that to happen, and I think while he's going to be talking about the corrupt system and all that kind of stuff, I don't think it's in his interest for that to happen, and so for that reason I think they'll hold back. If by some amazing circumstance he ends up going to jail, which I don't think either me or John think is very likely, if he has a jail sentence, then whoa, then batten down the hatches. But
assuming there's no jail sentence, I think that he'll be okay.
Trump is not above using a crowd to intimidate. We saw that on January 6, 2021, when he used a crowd that he had called to Washington, D.C. to hear him and his supporters speak at the Ellipse, to then march on the Capitol building to pressure members of Congress not to certify Joe Biden's victory. Now, that case, much more important in many ways than the one that we've just heard, will not be heard by November. Now, that's possibly a travesty of justice. Trump will probably try and summon supporters to New York for July the 11th. Chaz is right. If there's a guilty verdict, if on that day Trump is taken down to the cells for a period of time in jail, even if it's a very short period of time for processing, or there's a suspension of the sentence very quickly, that could be the spark that ignites a powder keg. And Trump will potentially try and orchestrate that. But that being said, we spoke to a former Trump advisor, asked him the same question today, Lorna, and he said, well, look, unlike the Capitol building, which is a large open space where mass crowds can march towards it, this downtown Manhattan courthouse is in a secure neighbourhood, hard to get a crowd there. There are busy roads. They're not going to block off the roads to encourage a crowd of 20 or 30,000 Trump supporters. So the chances are the physical location of this courthouse in Manhattan will prevent a repeat of what we saw on January 6th, but we can't be too sure of anything right now.
John and Chaz will have much, much more on that Trump verdict, because Planet America Fireside Chat is on at 8 p.m. Eastern here on the ABC News channel. They've got some great guests tonight. You can watch it anytime you like on ABC iView. In other news today, former Liberal staffer Bruce Lehrmann has met the deadline to lodge a notice of appeal with the federal court to challenge a finding that, on the balance of probabilities, he did rape Brittany Higgins in Parliament House in 2019. Mr Lehrmann has lodged a notice of claim for his appeal this afternoon, but no court date has yet been set. Elizabeth Byrne has the details.
Mr Lehrmann had already said, his lawyers had already said in court, that he was looking at an appeal, that he had instructed some other lawyers to look into whether that would be a viable option. You may remember he lodged this federal court case in the first case because his criminal trial was abandoned and there were no findings against him, and so he was trying to secure a ruling that he'd been defamed and that Ten and Lisa Wilkinson should pay for that. Well, of course, we now know that that didn't go his way, and so now we're looking at some kind of appeal possibly in the future.
Elizabeth, what might the consequences of the appeal be?
Well, in the original case, the original defamation case, the costs are still being determined. The costs have been awarded against Mr Lehrmann and are expected to be substantial and would be, technically paid to Ten, although the chances of Ten collecting that are said to be relatively slim. So that might be put on hold. The other thing, of course, though, is that Ten is still going to have to pay Lisa Wilkinson for her personal defence, which we now know was around $1.8 million, though how much of that they're prepared to pay is still being worked out.
OK, do you have any of the details yet?
No, and it's only the notice that's been filed today, so basically he's got his ticket in the queue. But it seems to be fairly obvious that the main target will be to take down this finding that, on the balance of probabilities, he raped Brittany Higgins. So I guess that will be sort of the grist to the mill in the case.
Elizabeth Byrne, thank you. A statewide code yellow has been called for all public hospitals in South Australia. It means all non-urgent elective surgeries have been cancelled. The state government and its health department are largely blaming the problem on a surge in respiratory illnesses and an ageing population. The president of South Australia's AMA, Dr John Williams, explains what code yellow involves.
Bed occupancy is at 100%, so there's no capacity to admit any more patients.
Why is it happening?
I guess the trigger at the moment is because of the viral infection increase, COVID, flu and RSV, so that's caused a surge in cases. There's 140 COVID and flu cases as inpatients now. but also it's had a huge impact on the staff. So there's 140 staff across the system that are off sick with COVID and the flu. So it's had a huge impact on the staffing levels.
Is it very early in the season for this to be happening, given that we're not even in winter yet?
Absolutely, it's really concerning. Prior to this, the hospital system was at capacity, and that's what we know is happening across the country. Hospitals' bed capacity is really reduced. EDs are full, and as we know, there's ramping is across the system, and that's a sign that across the board, EDs, inpatients, all of the system is under stress. And again, and really concerning, this is having an effect on the elective waiting list, the capacity to do the surgery, to put the patient into a bed after they've had the surgery. It's really concerning from a patient care point of view, and just how this bodes for our system as a whole going into winter.
Yeah, the elective surgery situation and any surgeries is an interesting one, because if people aren't going in for surgeries, they're waiting at home. It's costing them money because they might have already booked to come to wherever their hospital is. But does it have health consequences for them too, potentially?
Well, absolutely. So this is. The term elective surgery is really inaccurate. We'd prefer to call it planned surgery. This is essential surgery that needs to happen for the patient, and they're living with that condition while they're waiting for the surgery, and as a result, suffering. And I guess there's a potential that their condition may become worse in that time as well. So this is essential surgery. This is planned surgery, and it really needs to happen. And it's so, it has a huge impact on our patients when surgery is cancelled at short notice. And if this happens several times, it has a huge impact on their life and their well-being.
Has there been sufficient contingency planning for this? Are staff levels at the degree that they should be? Are beds being opened up by getting people out of them and back into the community?
We believe there are beds coming online. As I'm sure you understand, you can't just make beds happen straight away. So, there has to be buildings built and things put in place. But also there has to be the staff for those beds as well, and that is our concern as well. Look, COVID and the pressure on the health system has had a huge impact on medical staff and all health staff. As long-term pressure hasn't eased since COVID, and it really is taking its toll on the staff, and that is a huge concern for us. We'd like our medical staff to be able to do what they can do for their patients, do their best for their patients, and feel that they're doing the best they possibly can. And if that is made difficult for them, that is really difficult conditions to live under. So that is our concern, is the well-being of our workforce, and building a stronger workforce going into the future.
Dr. Williams, we hear about South Australia having ambulance ramping, long wait times in A&E. I mean, how does it compare to other states and territories? Why do we hear about it in South Australia more?
I think it's Australia-wide. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head how we compare at the moment, this week. But it is certainly an Australia-wide problem with bed capacity, elective surgery capacity. And I guess a really important part of this as well is the prevention of this, which is in primary care, which is in general practice. And they have been really hit hard over the long term by inadequate Medicare, and also more recently by payroll tax. So really, as I'm sure you understand, prevention is better than cure, and this is done in general practice in primary care, and investment really needs to be made into primary care to help this problem long term.
Just finally then, Dr. Williams, I'm sure patients will want to know how long the code yellow will be in place.
I really don't know. As I've said, this is really early in the season, and I would expect viral infection numbers to go up. So I don't know.
OK, we appreciate your time today, Dr. John Williams. Thank you.
Thank you.
Overseas now, and the Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea is touring areas in the country's highlands devastated by the massive landslide there as authorities rule out any hope of finding survivors under the rubble. Foreign Affairs reporter Stephen Jejets has more from the airport in Port Moresby.
Here in PNG's capital, Port Moresby, the relief effort in the wake of last week's devastating landslide is now beginning to really gather a bit more momentum. Behind me, you can see 2 Australian military planes taking supplies up to the devastated region in Enga province. They're taking things like essential sleeping packs, rations, water, the basic necessities for people who have lost all of their homes as a result of this catastrophe. Those on the ground say the gap between what they need and what governments and international partners are providing is still stark, even though the situation is better than it was a couple of days ago. It's taken a lot of time to move in any heavy earth-moving machinery, which is necessary in the long and painful and slow recovery of bodies which still remain beneath the rubble. And Papua New Guinea's government is now also grappling with the difficult task of working out how many more people need to be evacuated from the area because of the risk of further landslips. Some officials say some 8,000 or even 10,000 people may need to be moved because their villages are at risk of being enveloped if more of the mountain collapses. But at the moment, Australia is sending up geotechnical experts as well as disaster response teams, which will hopefully use drones to allow local authorities to make a more detailed assessment of just how stark that risk is and to make a more detailed assessment of exactly how many people might need to be moved. All of this is placing considerable strains on the resources, not just of the local governments in Papua New Guinea, but of the national government as well, which is why international partners like Australia are doing what they can to help. But the remote area and the difficult terrain means that this is going to be a long and painful recovery process that is likely to stretch on for weeks, if not for months.
Stephen Jejets there. Football is big business in Europe, especially this summer as the Euro Cup takes over the continent. But while the national teams are preparing for that big tournament, a sponsorship deal in Germany's Bundesliga has caused a stir. Borussia Dortmund is one of Germany's top teams, and they have found a new sponsor in Rheinmetall. Deutsche Welle correspondent Lars Holter joins us now from Berlin. Hi there, Lars. So tell us, what's so unusual about this sponsorship?
Well, the issue is with who exactly that sponsor is, because Rheinmetall is Germany's largest defense contractor. They're producing mainly wheeled and tracked military vehicles such as the Lynx infantry tank and the Fuchs armored personnel carrier. It also has a huge weapons and ammunition division, and its electronic solutions division focuses on digitalization of the military. So this is truly a cutting-edge company, but in a field that has never been seen doing advertising on such a scale. Now, initially, Rheinmetall even thought about advertising on the team's jerseys, but they're not doing that just yet for now. It's only within the stadium. Now, obviously, fans aren't happy about that. They're mostly saying that this is a terrible fit and that a defense contractor as a sponsor brings politics and even topics like war and death into what is supposed to be a fun pastime activity, watching football. Some, of course, are also pointing out that this will bring in a rumored 20 million euros, and if Dortmund wouldn't take it, some other team likely would. Meanwhile, German Economic Secretary Robert Habeck says this is where we're at. This is the times we're in, that obviously within Russia's invasion of Ukraine 2 years ago, we've reached a turning point in our society, and that the military now is front and center of our politics and our economy today.
I think I'd be pretty right in saying, though, Lars, that this isn't the first controversial sponsorship deal in football.
No, it is most certainly not. There have been partnerships before that fans especially hated. Some are with companies, for example, offering sports betting, something that can easily grab football fans and turn them into gamblers. Now, gambling obviously being highly addictive behavior. But to be more political, we've also seen the state of Qatar being a main sponsor of football in recent years. And if you blame Rheinmetall as a defense contractor for benefiting from war, you'd most certainly have to criticize the government government of Qatar for using football sponsorships to paint a friendly picture of a country that has a dismal human rights record. Sports washing is what that is often called, using advertising in a friendly environment pretty much as a propaganda tool to make the world look the other way and ignore a country's problematic policies.
OK, but are there any rules at all as to who can or cannot sponsor a football team or indeed a tournament?
Yes, there are indeed rules, but they seem to be kind of benign. The rules in Germany, for example, are prohibiting sports advertising for anything that touches on partisan politics and religion. Anything with ties to pornography and racism is out of the question, as are tobacco products and alcohol. That is at least strong alcoholic products. Beer, of course, isn't banned at all, and that would be hard to do in a country like Germany, where beer is often considered one of the main food groups. In fact, the breweries are among the main sponsors of the German league. They have many of the teams under contract, and fans are just fine with that. They enjoy the product. They do not, however, enjoy being reminded of life outside the stadium, it seems, as this uproar now over the Rheinmetall deal is showing.
OK, Lars, thank you very much for that. Lars Holter there, live for us in Berlin. The top stories on ABC News this hour. Donald Trump has become the first US president to be convicted of a crime after being found guilty in his hush money trial. The jury found Mr. Trump falsified business records to cover up a hush money payment to adult film star Stormy Daniels during the 2016 election. He will remain a free man as he awaits sentencing, but is likely to avoid prison. Bruce Lehrmann has lodged an appeal against the federal court's dismissal of his multi-million-dollar defamation case against Network 10 and Lisa Wilkinson. The former Liberal staffer lost the case and has also been ordered to pay Network 10's legal costs. The amount has yet to be determined. Mr. Lehrmann had until today to file that notice of appeal. South Australia's public hospitals are expected to run under an emergency for up to a week due to staff shortages. The state government declared a system-wide code yellow yesterday, freeing up beds and pausing almost all elective surgeries. It's being accused of failing to prepare for a winter surge of COVID and flu cases. And Australia's Alex de Minaur and Thanasi Kokkinakis are both through to the third round of the French Open. De Minaur defeated Spain's Jaume Munar in straight sets, while Kokkinakis claimed victory in a 5-set battle against Italy's Giulio Zeppieri. Men's top seed and defending champion Novak Djokovic and women's world number 2 Aryna Sabalenka both coasted through with straight sets victories. OK, let's return to our top story then. And the Trump trial has received wall-to-wall coverage by what some experts say is an increasingly partisan American media. Let's take a look at some of the headlines after the verdict came through, starting with the New York Times. Trump guilty on all counts in hush money case, they say. The Washington Post, a similar tone there. Donald Trump found guilty on all counts in New York hush money trial. The Wall Street Journal has gone with Donald Trump found guilty on all counts in New York hush money case. The right-leaning Fox News, well, the headline there, Trump blasts rigged disgraceful trial after the jury finds him guilty on all 34 counts. And the mostly conservative tabloid, the New York Post, declared Donald Trump convicted on 34 felony counts for falsifying business records in historic Manhattan hush money case. Well, senior researcher at the Australia Institute, Emma Shortis, says Mr. Trump is already trying to politicise the verdict.
Donald Trump has been running the line about this being a weaponised Department of Justice, engaged in a political witch hunt. So he's laid the groundwork for exactly that kind of narrative that has been taken up on the right of American politics with gusto. We've seen lots of his contenders for the vice presidential candidate come out really aggressively with the same kind of lines. And then, of course, in the other media universe, you see that this, there was no possible other conclusion to this case that, of course, Donald Trump was going to be found guilty. So we see really a reinforcement of narratives that have existed for a long time now.
I guess it'll be over the coming days and maybe after sentencing that this next thing that I want to talk about is pondered more, and that is the historical significance of what has happened today.
It is, look, we talk all the time when we talk about Donald Trump about his historic significance. He's doing unprecedented things all of the time. And so it's easy, I think, for that nature of today to be lost, but it is astounding, when you take a step back to think that a presidential candidate, a former president, has never been convicted of a crime before. And so for that to happen now in this political environment, given the volatility, given we know that, there's been a normalization of political violence in the United States in the last few years, it really is an extraordinary moment.
What about this comment from Donald Trump in messages to his supporters on his social truth site? Justice is dead in America.
Look, again, this is a narrative that Trump has been running for a long time, saying that the Department of Justice is in particular, but the entire kind of security state is completely corrupt. And he tells his supporters that, he is the only thing standing between them and that weaponized deep state. And so there is this sense, I think, in the United States that there's one justice system for some people and another justice system for others. And Trump has been really effective, I think, at weaponizing that narrative and in galvanizing his base in particular. I think the thing to watch will be how this plays out outside of his base, because we know his base is rusted on, of course. Apparently nothing is going to shift. What will matter is how it affects that circle.
Let's talk about the international reaction. Unsurprisingly, I guess, leaders around the world don't really want to comment on what has happened, but you can bet your bottom dollar they'll all be watching quite closely.
Absolutely. We've had the Prime Minister of Australia make a comment today, even though he didn't say anything particularly detailed about it. But of course, world leaders are watching this, as we were just discussing. This is unprecedented. And I think many are rightly really quite worried about what a second Trump administration might look like, given, that we know that some of the guardrails that were in place during the first Trump administration have fallen, and given what we know about Donald Trump's plans for a second administration, I think governments are really worried and should be actively planning for what their relationships with the United States might look like under a second Trump presidency.
And what we haven't talked about, Dr. Shortis, is that actually this is seen as one of the least significant cases that he is facing. There is more to come.
There's a lot more to come, and you're right that this case has been framed since the beginning, really, as the weakest of the 4 criminal cases that Donald Trump is facing. But I think what's I guess noteworthy about this case is that this is the first to establish a kind of arc, really, of attempted election interference and subversion that began with this case before Donald Trump's presidency, before the election. And so the fact that he's been found guilty on all 34 counts in this case, I think suggests to us a little bit how the rest of the cases may play out. Having said that, of course, it's extremely unlikely that any of the other criminal cases will be in any way resolved before we get to November. This was, for a long time, it's been clear that this case was the only one that was going to get close to a resolution before November. But again, this one will probably stretch out as well. Donald Trump has already said that he's going to appeal, and delaying these cases has been a tried and true tactic of his for a long time.
Dr. Emma Shortis, thank you for talking to us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Now, when you think of Australian film, the names Blanchett, Hemsworth, Robbie, Lerman perhaps may spring to mind, but they are relative newcomers to an industry dating back to the early 20th century. That rich history is increasingly fragile and under threat from the slow but inevitable march of time. Well, a relatively small line item in the federal budget, $9.3 million, is being heralded as a boon for the National Film and Sound Archive to protect some of the nation's oldest films.
The collection consists of more than 10,000 cans, and nitrate film was the very first film that was introduced in the 1890s. Our earliest film comes from around 1896, and up to the early 1950s, nitrate film was the only format in existence, so to speak. It was what was captured for theatrical releases, for documentary series, and it was known for its visual impact. It was very bright and colourful, dazzling, and you know, it was quite special. The only downside was, of course, that it's somewhat flammable if not stored in the best conditions, so it has got a bit of a bad rap as a result of that.
I think the colours are fascinating. I guess when you think about early photographs are black and white, so you just maybe make the assumption that it's sort of more rare to have coloured motion picture film, you know, or only really rich people had, you know, photographs that were hand tinted, you know, hand painted with lips and cheeks and things. But actually we have a lot of toned and tinted early nitrates, and the colours are beautiful. It's always good to know just what the condition is. You know, it's a bit like going to the dentist. You know, you have a good understanding of how your teeth are aging, and then maybe you might need one filling or two. It's important to wind it all the way through and check it. For nitrate, we need to understand its current condition. Cold storage, cool and dry is really important. We make sure we have copies of our films too, so digitisation and early copying processes are also part of that preservation strategy, so that we can limit the amount of time we need to see the original, but it's important to keep the original.
The Australians take the field in the gruelling heat and a wide variety of headgear.
A real standout for me is the Bodyline series. There's a series of Cine Sound newsreels that record the whole Bodyline series, the 5 test matches. Seeing Larwood sending down his bouncers and Bradman playing, it's quite special to be able to sort of experience or just see something that you know happened and is quite significant.
Australians are great fighters, as they showed last night.
There's also things like the story of the Kelly Gang, the first feature-length film worldwide. That's in the collection. We've only got 20 minutes of the original, I think, 90-minute running time, but you know, to see that and to see how creative people were, you know, it's 1906 I think it was made, so it's within 15 years of film first becoming a thing. It's quite interesting to see how quickly it sort of evolved.
We have a team in collection management who care for the films, make sure the vaults are up to standard, and that's part of that, keeping it safe. It comes into conservation to be cleaned and prepped, and then a huge team in digitisation really helping to make sure that we're getting the best copies, and you know, when we put a film particular age across a scanner for digitisation, and then what can we do in post-production. So there's the physical care, the physical preservation of that analogue format, and then also the digital care that can go into restoring, and everyone plays a role in that. It's painstaking, but it's very much a labour of love, and people feel really connected to the story and the early processes, and feel pumped when it goes out into the, you know, the big bad world for other people to get a kick out of seeing those early films like we do.
The pressure's certainly there to get it done before the ageing process catches up with it and it decomposes into you know, a gooey mess. But it's also exciting. There's a lot of films that haven't been properly wound through, so there's an element of excitement as you go through that, seeing people and places that you've read about and actually seeing them moving and living. It's you know, it's quite exciting.
We're really pleased about getting this funding. It will enable us to care for the nitrate in a way that will ensure it's safe for future generations, which we love thinking about because we get a kick out of treating things in the lab and making sure that they are stored in the best possible way. And the nitrate facility is looking a little bit, you know, it is 40 plus years old and needs an uplift and an extension. So we're really excited, and we're thinking about how we can look to our colleagues internationally for ideas around this process, really make sure that it's international best practice and it's sustainable.
Now, this is a big question for you. How do you think? Is it a constant running audio track, or perhaps you're more of a visual thinker? Maybe you don't have an inner monologue at all. Well, what kind of impact would that have on the way you see the world? Well, new research from the US and Denmark shows that people who have less internal speech do worse at some tasks, like judging if the names of objects they had seen would rhyme, or perhaps recalling words. Well, let's talk more about this. We're joined by a professor at the School of Psychology at the University of Queensland, Derek Arnold. Very good evening to you, Professor. I only know my own experience. I have a very busy dialogue and visual dialogue going in my mind, but there are a huge variety of different inner things going on. Tell us about some of the groups.
So some of us, we're collectively called aphants. So this refers to a term called aphantasia, which means without visual imagery. So some of us can't experience imagine visual experiences, so we can't read a book and imagine what the characters would look like. This paper was focused on auditory aphants, and these are people who have no inner monologue, who don't have that inner voice, that can't speak to themselves, and don't get earworms and will not hear Rick Astley over and over again.
I mean, it just seems incredible to me. I didn't know that some people didn't have that conversation in their head. Is it common?
No. So there's estimates between 1% and 4% of people have visual aphantasia, and about a quarter of those people will also have auditory aphantasia, who will not have an inner voice. So not hugely common, but not enormously rare by the standards of these things.
Is it detrimental to their living?
Not overtly. So if you have to do quite nuanced tasks to actually demonstrate an inability that, they're not so good at rhyming words, we're not so good at remembering sensory details if you quiz us about our long-term memories. We are still doing a lot of research in this area, and actually one of the things that we're finding out is maybe we haven't always had the best idea of what imagined experiences are actually for.
Okay, right, okay, I've got to get my head around that bit next. This research from America and is it the Dutch? Yeah. Is it particularly illuminating, or is it just that these things haven't been investigated before?
Well, one of the nice things about this study is that we're really bad at imagining that other people have a completely different lived experience to ourselves.
I'm the perfect example of that with what I've just said.
Exactly, and it goes each way. So as an aphant, we are incredulous when we realise that phrases such as picture this in your mind were not just phrases, but people can actually do that and count sheep before they go to sleep. We just thought that was a turn of phrase. Whereas equally, other people like yourself are incredulous when it's suggested that there are people that can't do that. So each of us has this instinctive, oh no, that can't be right. And so this study adds to other evidence that demonstrates that there are actual behavioural tasks that separate these people, that some of us cannot do tasks as well as others, and that gives us the objective evidence that validates what these people were saying about their lived experiences.
Is it limited to the extent of audio and visual?
No. So I'm a visual aphant. I don't have any imagined visual experiences, cannot imagine what my dear departed mother looked like. I also can't have any imagined experiences of smell or taste. So this is a multi-sensory inability, if you will, that varies between different aphants.
How long has this science been researched?
Well, we've known about this for about 100 years, but it wasn't terribly well researched. This has only really become prominent as a part of research again since about 2015, it was in a sense rediscovered. But when we rediscovered it, we've got all these technologies available to us now, so we can do brain scans, we can actually detect what people are thinking, we can even determine how intense their imagined experiences are. So we've got a lot of technologies that are available to us now that make this science tractable.
And how can the research help the experiences of the people that we're talking about?
Well, one thing that's pertinent is one of the most popular and successful psychological interventions across the world is visualisation. And at the moment, we now realise that about 1 to 4% of the population can't do that. And so it remains to be seen whether they can actually benefit from that kind of intervention. There's also issues around the education of our children. We quite often will encourage them to visualise. And at the moment, we don't really know how many of them can't do that. And if nothing else, that might lead to behavioural issues.
Just quickly, is it considered on the mental health spectrum?
No, not really. I would say that it's a benign form of atypical neurology. There are links between aphantasia and autism, but we still have some research to do to really work out and verify those.
I have very much enjoyed talking to you this evening. I love it when we have a guest on and I learn something. Professor Derek Arnold, thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Have a wonderful evening.
You too. Let's catch up with the sport. Here's Jared Coote.
Australians Alex de Minaur and Thanasi Kokkinakis are both through to the third round of the Tennis French Open. The 11th-seeded de Minaur defeated Spain's Jaume Muna in straight sets 7-5, 6-1, 6-4 to progress beyond the second round for the first time at Roland Garros. Kokkinakis, who is ranked 100th, prevailed after an epic 5-set battle against Italy's Giulio Zeppieri. The 28-year-old won 1-6, 4-6, 6-3, 7-6, 7-6-2. Men's top seed and defending champion Novak Djokovic also won in straight sets.
Well, there's always that kind of conviction and belief inside of me that I can win a slam. I mean, that's the reason why I'm still competing at this level. That's why I'm here. At this age, I wouldn't be really competing at the slams and continuing to play professional tennis if I didn't believe that I possess quality to go all the way to the title match.
Japanese golfer Yuka Sasso holds the outright lead after the opening round of the US Women's Golf Open in Pennsylvania. The 2021 champion holds a one-shot lead after a 2-under par round of 68. French amateur golfer Adair Sinosek is one of 3 players tied for second. Minjee Lee is the best of the Australians, 2 strokes off the lead at even par, following a round that included 5 birdies and 5 bogeys. Number 1 Nelly Korda had a horror opening round, finishing with a 10-over par round of 80. Carlton has moved into the top 4 after a 36-point win over Port Adelaide. The Blues led by just 7 points at three-quarter time, but surged with an 8-goal burst in the final quarter to win 16-11 107 to 10-11 71. Carlton's revival was led by captain Patrick Cripps with 2 goals in the opening 2 minutes of the final term. Despite the loss, Port Adelaide remains third on the competition ladder. And Sydney and Collingwood will open the 2024 AFLW season with a Friday night match at North Sydney Oval. The full fixture for the season has just been released, with the start date confirmed as the 30th of August during a bye week for the men's competition. Ahead of the final series, the women's teams will play an 11-game home and away season for the first time, up from 10 games last season. Parramatta has snapped a 5-game losing streak in the NRL with a 34 points to 22 upset win over ladder leaders Cronulla at Western Sydney Stadium. The Eels welcome back Mitchell Moses and captain Clint Gutherson to claim their first win under interim coach Trent Barrett. Parramatta winger Marcus Sevo scored a double while Moses impressed with the boot. The loss moves the Sharks down into second position. And 2 Australians will compete for an NBA championship after the Dallas Mavericks beat the Minnesota Timberwolves in their Western Conference Finals series. The Mavericks, with Australia's Josh Green and Dante Exum, won today's Game 5 124-103 to win the series 4-1 and book a spot in the deciding series. The Mavericks will take on the Boston Celtics in a best-of-7 game series for the title. That starts late next week.
And what Jared didn't mention there is that the Matildas are back in action tonight. They are ramping up their preparations for the Paris Olympics with a 2-match series against China. Reporter Brianna Fiore is at the Adelaide Oval ahead of the first of those 2 friendlies. Hi there. So we saw Australia fall in love with the Matildas, didn't we, during last year's World Cup? Is the hype continuing?
It sure has, and the rain hasn't kept fans away tonight. People are streaming through the gate at Adelaide Oval to catch a glimpse of the Golden Girls, with the Matildas and China set to kick off shortly. Now, the Matildas will be without star striker Sam Kerr, who has been sidelined with an ACL injury. Katrina Gorry will also miss tonight's match. Now, unfortunately for Kerr, she will also miss the upcoming Paris Olympics, but Gorry still remains a chance. And tonight's match is important. It's just a friendlies match, but a lot is still at stake. Several of the Matildas will be looking to prove why they deserve a spot on the plane to Paris, with only 18 spots up for grabs. We spoke to some fans earlier, including some people from when the Matildas first started out.
I'm original Matilda from 1979. We started women's soccer in Adelaide.
I want to be a Matilda one day, and they're a big inspiration to me.
We really like girls and we're celebrating our mummy and mama.
I remember years ago there wasn't really many people in the crowds at all, and now suddenly it's a sold-out game tonight.
I think we might be going to watch a soccer match somewhere. Is that right?
Yeah. This is the 14th consecutive sold-out Matildas match, with one more game between these 2 sides still to play in Sydney on Monday. And as you can see, fans of all ages just can't get enough.
Brianna Fiore, thank you very much. On the satellite, a thick cloud band is extending from WA's Kimberley region through to the Tasman Sea east of Tasmania. A low will deepen off the southeast coast, increasing strong winds, waves and rain in the east. Looking around the country, in Queensland, cloudy with showers over the interior and south, mostly sunny and cool in the west. To New South Wales and the ACT, a rainy day across the east and south with fine conditions in the northwest. For Victoria, a foggy start to a mostly sunny day across the state, partly cloudy in the south with snowfall on the Alps. In Tasmania, mostly sunny in the north with light showers clearing from the west and far south. To South Australia, isolated showers in the north, mostly sunny elsewhere with patchy morning fog in the west. In Western Australia, showers and rain in the southwest with the chance of thunderstorms along the coast. And in the Northern Territory, a slight chance of showers in the north, fresh and gusty winds over the interior and sunny in the south. Looking ahead to Sunday's forecast for the capital cities, a shower or 2 in Brisbane, a rainy day for Sydney and Canberra, partly cloudy in Melbourne, mostly sunny in Hobart. Clear skies over Adelaide, a possible storm with heavy falls for Perth, and sunny in Darwin, getting to 33 degrees. And that is the latest from ABC News for now. I'm Lorna Dunkley. Stay with us. I'll be back in a few minutes and we'll have more on what was a historic day in New York. Donald Trump found guilty of 34 felony counts of falsifying business records. So we will bring you the latest on that and the other top stories next here on ABC News.
Spicks and Specs returns to face the music and march to the beat of our own drum.